Om Janani Sharadang Devi Ramakrishna Jagadgurum Pada Padme Tayo Sritva Pranavami Muhurmu. Revered Srimad Swami Prabhananda Maharaj, other Swamis and Brahmacharis, and dear devotees. Well, I do remember that I visited this particular site long back in January 68. Mr. Bodas was worshipping. I stayed here for 2 days. And I think the last time I came here was the occasion of temple dedication. And in such a short time, this particular center has developed very much under the able leadership of Revered Prabhananda Maharaj. Well, when my young brother was telling about me, well, I was feeling somewhat different, because I myself feel that in all these years that I am in touch with this organization. I am one of those poor fellows, who have been given shelter and also protection and also guidance by the Holy Trio. Otherwise, I don't claim to have any special qualification which need to be told before the public. Well, the subject that has been given to me, is a little, abstruse in the sense that there are a lot of philosophical aspects, but I would not go into them. I would like to confine myself to this subject from the standpoint of the Ramakrishna Vivekananda literature and Gita. And I shall not stretch my ideas to any other important scriptures or other books. First of all, the topic, that renunciation and service. Swami Vivekananda, while giving his response to an interview conducted by Prabhupada Bharat, it seems it was Sister Nivedita who was interviewing Swami Vivekananda. And on that occasion, Swami Vivekananda made this wonderful statement. The national ideal of India are renunciation and service. Intensify her in those channels and the rest will take care of itself. It is a very important statement in the sense that we find that this particular idea has inspired the followers of Swami Vivekananda to give a proper shape to the organization and its activities. But the moment we look into these two words, renunciation and service, when you say renunciation, you are expected to give up. To what extent, that has not been clearly mentioned, but we know from scriptures and from tradition that, he must give up everything, including the troublesome ego, which bothers many of us. But service is a positive concept. How to reconcile this between these two? Particularly the traditionalists, they think that this world itself is unreal. So why should you waste your time and energy to the service of the rich? That is something different. And apparently these two contradictory terms, which appear to many of us as contradictory, but to Swami Vivekananda, it was not. He reconciled these two concepts so satisfactorily that it helped to evolve the wonderful motto of the Ramakrishna order, that is Atmana Mokshartham Jagodhitaya Cha. That itself is a separate story, but this much I tell you, the genius of Swami Vivekananda now is quite very, very much revealed when he gives such a wonderful twist or turn to this wonderful concept. Now, renunciation, you will find this particular concept is the central theme of the different religious bodies in different religions. And renunciation, whenever we use the word renunciation, we mean renunciation of wealth and greed, renunciation of sex and lust, and renunciation of the ego. These are accepted by the practitioners of all the different religions, particularly those who believe that religion is nothing but realization. For all of them, these three are very important areas. Here, these three aspects are stressed very much, no doubt, but at the same time, we have to understand that this renunciation has two important facets, the outward renunciation and inward renunciation. Both of them are to be taken into consideration because one is dependent on the other. Besides that, one has to understand that, that if we want to acquire renunciation in its proper form, then we have to understand that we must be free from attachment. Attachment is a very important issue. And attachment to different ideas, different persons, different concepts, that is at the root of all these troubles, But before we take it up, let us try to understand that renunciation and detachment do not mean callousness and indifference. Often we make mistakes. Now, callousness is not at all non-attachment. On the other hand, it is nothing but selfishness. And it is something which is clinging to ego. This is something which we have to remember. Now, if you go into the details and you find that, this I refer to Gita. Gita in the 2nd chapter, very beautifully it has been explained that how we get attached to different ideas, different persons, different concepts, etc. In the 2nd chapter, from where, Dhyato, Vishwan, Pungsha, etc., etc., it has been clearly mentioned that whenever we think of something, why we think of something, behind this, the great commentator Sridhar Swami says, there is that Uddhash. What kind of Uddhash? Anandodhash. This Uddhash itself is responsible for attracting our mind to certain things. As for example, every day in the morning I take a walk. One day I found there is a beautiful flower which I have not seen before. I looked at it. And while returning again I looked at it. And day after day when I take the morning walk, I look at it and I find it is something wonderful. Something to remember, something to look at. Now by thinking repeatedly this, by the principle of association, we get attached to this. And because that same verse of Gita says that when we get attached to that, from that grows a desire. Desire connected with that. And not only connected with that, that is something which has to do with me and I. These two concepts get mixed up with that association and I become attached to it. This is at the root. This is the psychological reason behind all kinds of attachment. Now, these attachments get rooted in our mind, and we Hindus believe that, in our past lives, already there is a big accumulation of all those sanskaras. And these are all loaded with different kinds of attachment. And at different times they crop up and they create problems for us. So this is something which is important, and we have to get rid of it. And that is the purpose of renunciation. Now, naturally the question comes, why this search, or why all this problem that we are considering? What is the harm if we have this kind of association with different objects, different persons? The answer is very simple. If you analyze your mind, you find that, your ego and its ideas, it has built a world of its own, and it doesn't allow normally a person like me to go beyond it, to see beyond it. It has created, compartments after compartments, and I remain confined to that. And if I cannot go beyond that, I can hardly do any innovative work or any creative activity. Impossible. So it is a big problem. And if you are in search of God, in search of the Spirit or the truth, you must be able to overcome all these restrictions that have been created by ego. That is a very serious problem. And that ego itself, if it is very, very strong, it becomes very difficult even for a scientist, to do innovative work or creative activity. So we have to overcome it. Besides that, we Hindus who believe in emancipation, in liberation from the cycle of birth and death, we have to be aware of this particular problem, and we must overcome it. So that is the importance of this. Now, how to overcome this association, how to overcome this problem, and how to practice renunciation. Without going further to other things, if we confine ourselves to Ramakrishna Vivekananda literature, we find that Sri Ramakrishna himself has suggested two important methods. One is the method of discrimination, the path of knowledge. Another, the path of devotion. And I am not going into details about these methods, but the interesting thing, Swami Vivekananda came forward with a third proposal, in his commentaries on the famous book, Patanjali Yoga Sutra. He is explaining in one place very beautifully that this is a non-traditional approach that is very important. He says that from a wider perspective, we can consider this problem of renunciation, a little deeply. He says that the two motive powers of our activities are A, what we see ourselves, and B, the experiences of others. These two forces throw the mind-lake into various waves. Renunciation is the power of battling against these forces and holding the mind in check. Their renunciation is what we want. And to control the twofold motive powers arising from my experience and from the experience of others, and through them prevent the chitta from being governed by them, and we know that is the true renunciation or vairagya. Now Swamiji, very interestingly, he mentions that this sort of mental strength is called renunciation. This is a very important idea. Neither of those methods which has been suggested in the earlier scriptures, and as for example, the method of discrimination or the method of devotion. This is other than that. This is somehow to bring the mind under control. And if you can keep the mind under control, the ego cannot create serious problem for us. We can proceed. So this is also another method. But this is something very interesting in the sense that, you have a wider perspective And from that wide perspective, it becomes rather easier to handle it. And if you go into further details, you will find that here the method that has been prescribed in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra or in Raja Yoga, well, that has to be made use of. So these are the three methods that has been suggested. Now, renunciation, when we consider it from the objective standpoint, we find that it is a rejection of the world. It suggests that all these are ephemeral things, We need not waste our time and energy. We should not pay attention to them. And even when they create problems for us, let us try to avoid them somehow. But from the subjective point of view, however, you find that those who practice renunciation, they may find that it is a positive spiritual gain. Mind's horizon expands. Not only that, the vision of the different spiritual searches, it widens. Instead of a feeling of loss, there comes a feeling of fuller and more satisfactory acquisition. This is something which I and you feel. Those who practice this renunciation, they will definitely agree with me. And if we study this particular phenomenon, then we find that as Swami says, that renunciation, you will find it really aims at deification of the world. We usually say that, well, this world itself is not real. What we perceive through the five senses, well, is something which may be real to me in my experience. But if you analyze it, you will find that it is not real. It is something different from that. And based on that, there is so much of philosophy and so many different religious practices. But Swami says, this is based on Upanishad, particularly based on Ishopanishad. Based on that, we find that Swami says that, well, the idea of renunciation helps us to defy this world. You will find that God is everywhere. And if you can develop this concept, and if you can find out the reality from this standpoint, you will find that, well, that method of renunciation is no more a negative factor, only a negative concept. It is something very, very positive. It suggests that give up the world as we think of it. And what to do? In its place, try to know it as it should appear, as it is really so. This is something you have to try. You have to defy, and you will find that there is none but God alone. This is a very interesting and important concept. Now, in that Ishopanishad, you find that the first verse, it says, in English, it says, whatever there is changeful in this ephemeral world, all that must be enveloped by God. By the renunciation, support yourself. Do not covet the wealth of anyone. Isha vastam idagam sarvam jatkintra jagattam jagat. Teno takteno. Teno takteno. This is a very important idea that we have to do. What it is that we have to teno takteno bhunjita. We have to enjoy. We have to enjoy by knowing that it is nothing but God. This particular verse was very popular to Gandhiji. I feel tempted to mention that his idea of trusteeship, that also emanated from it. In his lecture in Kerala, in 3 places he mentioned it repeatedly, and this particular verse has drawn the attention of so many scholars all over the world. Now, here this particular Upanishad says this. Now, this Upanishad says that if you want to defy the world, here is the solution. Teno takteno bhunjita. What does it mean? It means that by this renunciation, support yourself. Now, if you renounce something, how can you depend on it? You cannot depend on it. So we have to find out what it means. What supports us is in fact not something which we renounce, but what we possess and what we enjoy and what is with us. And this verse tells us to enjoy the world through the possession of God. This is a very important idea. And as I mentioned in that verse, what has been said, let me repeat again. Whatever that is changeful in this ephemeral world, all that must be enveloped by the Lord, by God or by the Lord. By this renunciation, support yourself. Do not covet the wealth of anyone. But how? How is it possible? It can be explained easily in this way. When we look on the surface of water, we find that a bubble arises on a sheet of water. It plays for an instant on that surface and disappears. Naturally, if we observe it and then we ask, whence did it come? What was it? And where did it go? The answer is, from water it came, and having come, it is water still, and unto water it returns at the end. The real nature of that something which existed temporarily for a while, the bubble, is nothing but water. Similarly, if you look at the ephemeral world, you find that Brahman is the real nature of this world. Realize that and do not lose sight of that, caught up in the trivial waves of passing sense of experiences. A very simple example let me give. Well, when we are unmindful and suddenly we come across there is something and I feel that, there is a snake. In fact, there was nothing but a rope. And because I was unmindful, because there was not sufficient light perhaps, so I took it as a snake. And, immediate reaction was there in me. But afterwards, when I watched carefully, I found that, well, it is not snake, it is nothing but a rope. Let us try to understand that unless there is that rope or some such thing, you cannot have that kind of illusion. Likewise, when you say that, well, this world is illusory, well, this is possible only because behind it there is something. There must be a foundation. There must be a background, without which there cannot be any such phenomenon. As in the case of cinematographic machine, when it operates, and it projects through some film, some light, and when the film moves at a certain rate, you find that there is a series of pictures, incidents happening in front of you. Now, if there is no wall or any white screen, you find that, well, you don't see anything. So you need a substratum, you need a foundation. That is something important. So likewise, if you look deep into the ephemeral world, you will find that it has a foundation and it is nothing but Brahma. That is the important thing. And based on that, when you have that knowledge, then only you can easily renounce this ephemeral world. So this is a positive idea, this is not a negative idea. And this is something very interesting, And as I told you earlier, our ego, which creates, small areas of operation, it creates something of its own and tries to keep myself, within the confines of those, things. I find that I'm imprisoned, When I feel that I'm imprisoned, I try to get out of it. Most of the times I don't feel at all. That is also something for which, the ego is responsible. We have to be careful about that. And Swamiji has beautifully said that to live in the world and not to be of it is the true test of renunciation. It doesn't tell you that, well, you have to leave this world and lead a monk's life. Not necessary. Provided, you can live in this world, but you must not be a parcel of it. As has been said beautifully, that when a boat plies on the surface of the water, Well, water must not get into the boat. Otherwise, you will be in difficulty. Then only when you are sure that there is no hole in the boat, then only you can expect that the boat will take you to your destination. So, you be in the world but must not be part of it. This is the real renunciation. This is something very important. Now, why all these topics now I brought in? We find that if you take this stand, then you find that, well, there is a very close connection with what we mean by service. Now, in our modern society, there are many activities which are described by the word service. Now, the government serves the people, the railway board serves the passengers, the industrialist serves the consumers, and in this way we find the individuals act merely for personal gain, but they not only act for their personal gain, but also for the good of the society. This is something which we find in our society. And from this standpoint, we find that those people who serve, they willy-nilly have to share something. And that portion goes to the persons who enjoy it. Now, no doubt the principle of renunciation also works there, but in a very minor measure. Now, Swami Vivekananda, he did something very interesting. He imported into that relationship something which is supramundane. And with this outlook, he gives a new meaning to the activities of service. When we serve, as for example, when you are in a classroom, if you are a teacher, you are helping the children to learn, well, you are giving something and they are the beneficiaries. In such a situation, try to understand that, well, if we understand that in front of me there are children, but in the garb of children there are Narayanas. In every one of them there is Narayana. So when we are teaching something, when we are helping them to learn something, we are actually worshipping. We are the worshippers. And who are these children? All these children are the veritable manifestation of Narayana. If we remember it, then our attitude will change completely. And from this standpoint, you find that, well, these children and my own children, well, they are not different from the standpoint of this particular truth. In every one of them there is Narayana. There is a very interesting dialogue between Swami Vivekananda and Sharachandra Chakraborty, one of his disciples who maintained diary. One day Swami is telling, without renunciation, none can pour out his whole heart in working for others. The man of renunciation sees all with an equal eye and devotes. And at your own very threshold, you find the Narayana himself in the form of a poor beggar who is dying of starvation. Instead of giving him anything, would you only satisfy the appetites of your wife and children with delicacies? Swami mentioned this and finally he says, why? This is beastly. This behavior which we find often among us, this is something which is not expected of men. This is something very important. Swami Vivekananda, from his two ideas. One idea, first of all, as has been suggested by Ishopanishad, the whole thing, whole creation is nothing but a manifestation of God. The difference between an ordinary person and an illumined person is this, that the ordinary person does not try to find out the reality or the nature of the reality. As against the illumined person finds that there are so many various manifestations of the same truth, the same reality that is Brahman. This is the difference. And Swamiji, first of all, realized it. This is point number one. And second point is equally or more important, that there is only one reality. And one reality has manifested in so many forms. And if we understand that, then you will find that the same Narayana or Brahma, whatever you say, is manifesting in different forms, as my own child at home and also as the children in the classroom. The same thing is true about all other places or all other situations where someone is serving and someone is receiving that service. So this is something very interesting and important. Besides this, we have to understand that, well, to make this service really successful, we must develop an attitude. Why this question of attitude comes? If you look into the Gospel, in one place there is a beautiful statement. It says that, look, renunciation does not mean only to give up something. It also means that you must acquire something. Thereafter explaining, it says that, well, by renunciation, you are giving up the ephemeral things and you are trying to find out the nature of the truth or God. These two must go together. Otherwise, it is not going to work. So when we learn how to renounce, we may begin with, the material things, etc. Thereafter, we may dive deep into the recesses of our heart and try to give up those internal attachments, etc. And thereafter, let us try to tackle the problem of ego. While we are doing all this, if we remember that our idea is definitely to focus our attention on that reality, which is nothing but one. So when we start service or renunciation of service, it begins with giving up certain material things, etc. But gradually, we find that we need to change our attitude. Our attitude towards the world, our attitude towards human being, our attitude towards our family members, attitude towards the other people. We and other. This division, will dissolve. If we understand at least intellectually that there is but one truth, one reality which is present in everywhere. So these two basic concepts help Swami Vivekananda to have a beautiful connection between this concept of renunciation and service. In fact, if you go into details, you'll find that renunciation and service are but the two sides of the same coin, obverse and reverse of the same coin. And further, you will find that without renunciation, you cannot serve properly. If you are after your name, fame, etc., you cannot serve any people satisfactorily. If you learn how to renounce the different kinds of adjuncts that are already with me, and not only with that, we are after them. We are after name, fame, recognition, etc., etc. If we are not able to give them up, we shall not be able to serve. I feel tempted to mention one verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. In the third section, it is there, in Kopila Devahati Sambad. There it beautifully mentions that Arohe Dano Manabham Moitra Bhinnena Chakshusha. There it says that, well, when you worship, you must have these four ingredients. Then only you will find that your worship will be worthwhile. What is that? When you serve a poor man, you give him something, maybe food, maybe cloth. When you serve the children in a classroom, you give him some learning lessons, etc. You are trying to give something which is the felt want, felt need of the person concerned. By serving that man or that child, with that item, with that single thing, you are actually helping him and he gets satisfied. Therewith, the Narayana in him gets satisfied with you. So something you want to give. This is point number one. This is dana. Then mano. Mano means dignity. You must give dignity. This is something very, very important. You watch how, whenever we do something, we offer something, how we behave. We behave well. We are in a superior position. I am doing this, I am doing that. And we don't give any kind of importance to the person who is receiving. We don't bother about the dignity, This Bhagavatam clearly mentions that you must pay due attention and due dignity to the person whom you are offering. Without that, it will not be a good service. 3.3. Maitri. You must give friendship. By different, terms, they have given different meanings, but usually what we mean by the word love, affection. You must treat him as your own. And if you treat him as your own, you find that you not only give certain things, but you add something, as a result of which the receiver, he enjoys it, he makes full use of it, and he is benefited. You have seen when the mother feeds the child, with how lovingly she does it. And that is something different perhaps from another person, another relative, who, as a part of duty, is feeding the child. So difference is very clear. So Maitri is the third point. And the fourth point is that Abhinnana Chakshusha. Try to understand that the same Narayana is in you and him, or in you and her. This is something fundamental. Maybe that you have not realized it, but intellectually at least you can grasp that this is something which you cannot avoid. So if you have these four components, then you will find that you are able to worship properly. If you have all these four components, then you will find that your work has turned into worship. And Swami Vivekananda, when he introduced this concept of service, he had these basic two ideas which I mentioned, that these two ideas must be kept in view, otherwise, you will not be able to make any kind of progress. Now, if you go a little further into details, you will find one very important thing, that how we pay so much attention, or why should we pay so much of attention to human beings, And those who are paying attention, those scholars, there are 9 scholars who have, foreign scholars, who have, who have done a lot of research work on the concept of service introduced by Swami Vivekananda. Most of them, including Dr. Beckerleg, he has written several books. In the year 2000, he has written a book entitled Ramakrishna Mission. Again, in 2006, January, he has published another book, Swami Vivekananda's Legacy of Service. Besides Beckerleg, about 8 persons that I know of, I have read them. Every one of them has claimed that this concept of service was something which he had borrowed from the Christians. And also the concept of, this service in an organized way, this he has learned from his European tour, etc., etc. But not only that, one of them has written that, the Lila Prasanga, the great master, mentions one very important incident in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. It was the year of 1884. It was summer. And Sri Ramakrishna was in ecstasy. When he came down from that ecstasy, he narrated something wonderful. And you know that one, not Daya, but Shiva. I am not going to into details. Every one of you know. That writer has said that, this is something, which has been conjured up by Swami Sharadananda to justify his leader, Swami Vivekananda. It is not real. It is not real at all. But I tell you, read carefully the Gospel. On the 2nd of February, 1884, you find that Sri Ramakrishna met with a serious accident, and there was a dislocation at the elbow joint. And on the 2nd of February, Master Mahendranath Gupta, he had come with the doctor and with bandage, cotton, etc. And, the doctor came and bandaged it, etc. From that time onward, if you read carefully, Sri Ramakrishna is repeatedly mentioning that I find there's a big change in me. I find that the Divine Mother is telling me repeatedly that I must not be in that ecstasy all the time. I must bring down my mind to the level of human beings, and we must pay attention to the human beings. Why? Because there is more manifestation of the divine in human beings. And he says in his words, on the 9th of March 84, he says, one often sees small holes along the edge of a lake. Fish and crabs accumulate there. Just so, there is greater accumulation and divinity in man. It is said that man is greater than the shallow. Man is Narayana himself. If God can manifest himself through an image, why not through men also? This is in the month of March. And in fact, that particular incident mentioned in the Great Master was also in the month of March and April. So not only this, I can cite at least another 11 or 12 examples, which shows that, Sri Ramakrishna gave the idea. And not only that, Swami Vivekananda thereafter repeatedly mentioned this particular idea, So I am more than sure that it was Swami Vivekananda who learned it from his master, and also because of his own experience and his own realization of the truth. He was a realized soul. As you know, he had that experience of Brahman when he was in Kashipur, and from that experience also he had learned that the same reality known as Brahman or Atman is in every human being. So based on those experiences, he had introduced this concept of service. So renunciation of service, as he had mentioned on that particular day during the interview, that this renunciation of service is truly speaking, this is the national ideal of India. And we have to strengthen this particular two ideas. Then only you will find that every other aspect of the national life will be strengthened. No doubt, after Swami Vivekananda introduced this concept, it has become very popular. Even those monastic orders which denounce all kinds of activities, which denounce service, which criticize Ramakrishna mission, now every such organization is having a wing, service wing. What to say of others? If you visit Kaladi, the birthplace of Sri Shankara, there also you find there is a Shankar mission. And quoting Shankara, in fact I should say it is a misquoting. If you read carefully Shankara was not against it at all. Quoting Shankara, many of them criticize the Ramakrishna mission, but if you read seriously and if you go deep into it, you find that Shankara himself is not criticized. It has become quite popular. But I say, it has not yet been able to enter into the heart of all the groups, the leaders, etc. If we do not remember the perspective, we shall not be able to do justice. We shall not be able to whip up that national spirit. If we want to do that, we must try to understand those two basic concepts of Swami Vivekananda, which is behind this spirit of service. Then only we shall be able to strengthen the national life along this particular direction based on renunciation and service. So this is something very interesting and important. Many thanks for giving me a patient hearing, and I am grateful to Revered Bhavamananda Maharaj that he himself, though he is not in good health, he has attended this meeting. I am grateful to him. Many thanks.